need to make a correction there too. And I'm actually EDV, so I'm educational. So that's nice for the promotion. Yeah, we want to be true, transparent. Yes, I'm EDV. And I am so honored to be working with the elder here. I'm actually standing in for a PhD. So.
Yeah, Carolyn Murray was supposed to present, but she had a death in the family, and she couldn't come. And it reminded me of a story I heard about a farmer who, well, I'll tell you later. First, let's have libation. First, in the tradition of my African ancestry, permit me to call upon the Creator to be in our presence and to guide us here today and forever. We call upon our ancestors and our elders to provide the generational continuity so that our culture is transmitted from generation to generation. Everybody say Ashe?
Ashe.
Now, to tell you the story that I was going to tell you, there was a farmer who had a pond, and he would get on his tractor and cut the grass around the pond from time to time. And he had a sign by the pond that said, "No swimming." So one day he was out cutting, and he saw somebody out in the middle of the pond he thought was swimming. So he stopped the tractor, got off, and said, "Hey, didn't you see that sign that said no swimming?" He didn't get any response, so he got back on the tractor and kept on cutting grass. So he got on the tractor, kept on cutting grass, came back around the second time, and he saw the guy. And so he got off the tractor. He said, "Hey, you, didn't you see the sign that said no swimming? If you don't get out of there right now, something's going to happen, you know." And so the guy said, "I'm drowning." But that's how I felt when Carolyn Murray, who was supposed to present with me, called me and said she had a death in the family and she couldn't come. And so I felt like I was drowning. I really panicked because I don't know if you know her. She's a professor at Riverside, UC Riverside, and a very dynamic person. And I consulted with Darrell Rowe, and he said, "Since this is a CE, you need to go and find out if they can still use this as a CE because she's not going to be here." And so I went down to the front desk. Somehow I ran into this lady.
Spirit.
And they said, "Oh, Dr. Nunley can fill in. She knows education." And so I said, "Oh." Thank you. So one thing about that story, I didn't give you the ending. I don't know whether what the guy, the tractor, did. Did he, you know, once he found out the guy was drowning, I don't know what he did. So I leave it up to you to use your imagination to figure out what he did and what you might have done. I heard one person say, "Call 911. I'm going to be drowned by the time you call 911. Another said, "Well, leave him out there. He shouldn't have been out there in the first place. Let him drown." You know. So no one answer to there's no one answer to that riddle. So I'm on a time schedule. So if people just came in, maybe if you want to contact one of us later, that's the email address to contact. I'm William Thomas, and this is Dr. Nunley. She says she's ED and not PhD. Title of the presentation is called Learning While Black. So I'll give you an example of what happened to me that may illuminate you and let you know what I mean by learning while black. I got my PhD from the University of California at Berkeley, and I don't know how I got accepted other than by the grace of God, but when I went to the Department of Counseling Psychology, where I was going to, focus, they gave me an advisor. I remember the first thing he said to me, he says, "You're on probation." Never met the guy before.
Right.
So that's what I call learning while black, You just assume that you affirmative action or whatever, and we're going to make sure we know. Yeah. So anybody, do you have an example of learning while black? Anybody?
My example would be, not only because as I got my doctorate degree 20 years after getting my BA, and I got it with a bunch of white females in PWI. So there was always this assumption that the only thing that I know is actually experiential, just life knowledge, and that's it. Just like she's just old and she knows that. She knows nothing about the theories and the concepts that now I know all too well. So there was an assumption, there's an assumption that I'm not going to understand a lot of things just because I'm old and I'm black. And I'm a woman.
Okay. So let's move the.
Oh.
The next slide.
All right.
Okay, those are some terms we're going to be throwing around. Some of you know them already, but if you don't, I think it would be helpful to briefly review them and ask me a question if you don't know the definition of any. Especially that last one. Anybody? Any question? All right, intelligence. There are as many definitions of intelligence as there are people in this room and more. But the one I came across when I was doing research for this presentation, was given by Dr. Robert Williams, who did the BITCH test. How many people heard of the BITCH test? Yeah. He said he thinks of intelligence, he thinks of 3 rubber bands of different sizes, small, medium, and large. And he said people are different in the way that we inherit different capabilities. Some the large, some the medium, some the small. And that the environment determines how well we learn to adapt and to achieve. So that's my definition of intelligence too. Anybody else want to question that? Or, okay, you're a good audience already. All right, next slide. Okay, the title, as we said, was Learning While Black, a brief history of Larry P. versus Wilson Riles, State Superintendent of Education in California in 1971. And Hannon, PASE, PASE versus next slide. Well, these are the objectives.
Go back.
Well, that's another term to know. Yeah. Yeah.
You want me here?
No, let them see that term. Yeah. Because that's,
Here you go.
yeah. That is key. Disproportionality. As I was about to say, Larry P. versus Wilson Riles, the Superintendent of Education in the state of California, and PASE versus Hannon. PASE means parents parents involved with education in Chicago. Sometimes I don't understand what that PASE means. Parents in action. Parents in action in special education. PASE. Got it. Okay. Parents in action in special education.
I'm going against to that.
Yeah.
There we go. This is what you're referring to.
In Chicago. The first case was, of course, the one in California. And a group of parents in 1971 filed a class action suit because too many of their children were disproportionately placed in EMR classes, educable mental retarded classes, who were put there on the basis of a score that they got on an IQ test. And of course, when they were placed in special education, the program did not educate them. It's just like this. I imagine most of you know DSM-5, right?
Yes.
So when you diagnose a patient, that's just the beginning. What you gonna do after you diagnose them? So these kids were labeled and sent to graveyard. I mean, because there was no expectation that their disabilities would be remedied, so-called disabilities. So what happened was they got in touch with the Association of Black Psychologists, and 4 psychologists, I believe, retested the kids. That would be William Pierce, Harold Dent, Gerald West, and Asa Hilliard was a expert witness. And so the kids scored below, they scored below mental retardation on the IQ test, but when they were retested by the black psychologists, they scored in the 90s. So that tells you something about testing. If one person gets a score that puts you in the retarded range, another person, it says it's not predicted. Is that the term, the validity? Yeah, there are three different kinds of the validity, right? And more, say, reliability. Yeah, they weren't reliable.
Right.
Yeah, so, in short, in California, the judge agreed that the test was biased. For example, one of the questions was, who discovered America? And those of you who have given IQ tests know if you don't say Columbus, you get 0 for that question. But as somebody, Malcolm X said, you didn't come here, we didn't come here on the Mayflower, or what is it, Plymouth Rock? Yeah, Plymouth Rock landed on us, you know. So that's important to know. Yeah. Now, go back to the goals of.
Okay. So now we're gonna go to the learning objectives. There we go.
Okay. So the objectives, because this is a CEU, and I think you will be asked to do a evaluation after the workshop. So these questions are important to know, terms rather, or concepts. The overrepresentation of black students in special education is not only the result of test bias. Psychometrists has no valid link to instruction. Go back to DSM-5. Once you diagnose, what you gonna do? You gotta have a plan how you're gonna remedy the disability or the whatever the symptoms that the person's presenting. So there was no connection between IQ scores and what the instruction was in the class. So that kind of, you know, makes the testing useless. Third one is special education curriculum is primarily designed to teach social adjustment, not reading, writing, and arithmetic like, you know, the regular education. And once you get in those special education classes, it's highly unlikely that you're going to get out. You know, they don't teach you anything to enable you to get out. So the curriculum is not designed to remedy your disability, whatever it is, that the psychologist diagnosed you will put you in the class. And the fourth one is the history of testing, is a history of racial prejudice, social Darwinism, and scientific mystique to legitimate such prejudice. In other words, we were considered 3/5 of a person, which thing in the Constitution said we were not fully, what it was? 3/5? 3/5 of a person? Yeah, back then. And so there's some residual effects of that still, you know, going on where they don't, I hate to mention Trump's name, but that's, you know, what he would say that genetically, we just are not really fully human, you know, that we're 3/5 of a person.
Can I go back up to number 3?
Go back, yeah.
So on number 3, that learning objective, the social adjustment, special education, so I'm sorry, yeah. So I'm a practitioner, and so I'm a teacher educator, and to be in a special education classroom, it's monetized. So we make more money if we retain you there. So that there's not a real incentive to get you out of the classroom, except when you're being evaluated your instruction ability, then you may want those children to stay home that day. But otherwise, you want them to stay on the roll, so there's the monetary incentive to keep you in special education.
student, they get paid $30 a day, but then the special ed student, they get paid $40 a day, like.
That's correct, something like that.
Yeah.
Yes, something that there's a formula that you are paid more. If your children are special education, then your school makes more money. Yeah, so there is a monetary incentive.
But it's quite significant in terms of the difference, because let's say, for instance, I'm from Colorado, and it's like $7,000 for quote unquote the normal kid, and $14,000 special ed. It's huge.
The other issue is that by the time there's a cutoff period for those funds that are dumped into that school, so if the cutoff is October, when October comes and the school has the money for that child, they then find reasons to expel that child. That child then has to go to another school or be homeschooled or whatever, but the funds have already been deposited at the first school, so no funds follow that child when it is rejected or expelled.
Go ahead here.
And I was also thinking about just the basic low expectation bias, because if you have a classroom filled with people that look like us, then the expectation that we can do better is not there. So
Right.
you're not even gonna motivate the student, but if you get persons in there, we all know, who can motivate, inspire, and see the potential,
Right.
they don't, so it's like they're stuck,
And for number 3, I found it to be the reverse, actually, where students with IEPs, they tend to have curriculums that are focused on the reading, writing, and mathematics versus the social adjustments, because the IEPs have to be standards-based.
Is everybody familiar with that term?
Individualized education plan. So any student who's considered special ed must have an IEP.
Which state are you from?
Georgia.
Okay, so in both of us, California?
Yeah, and so every student who receives an IEP, they are provided instruction and they are expected to meet the same standards as the general education student.
Theoretically.
Theoretically, and according to the state standardized assessment, they are still expected to pass that assessment, the same assessment as students who are general ed, but they are given accommodations theoretically to meet. But I just want to say it's in reverse, because my frustration as a psychologist in the schools is that they're not receiving the social adjustment support that they need for students who are considered emotionally disturbed, all right? They are given reading, writing, and mathematics from 8 to 4, but they're not receiving that social adjustment support.
So I'm wondering if.
And that's the frustration, because then it keeps them stuck, right? Because they're not getting that support for their disorder.
It sounds like the elder is going to go further. I'm thinking you have a different definition of social justice, but maybe I'm.
Yeah, the key word is primarily that they're taught reading, writing, and arithmetic, but a more basic level, because you can't learn higher math, so to speak. Okay. Now, let's look at number 4. It said history of IQ testing is a history of racial prejudice, social Darwinism, and scientific mystique to legitimate such prejudice. I looked at the term social Darwinism. I just came back from the Galapagos Island where Darwin did this experiment. And he developed a theory of evolution, and it was based on looking at animals. And what he noticed was that the animals that survived were stronger than the ones that did survive. They were weaker. But when I was there, I saw them collecting turtle eggs, putting them in an incubator so that they would survive. So that's affirmative action. Yeah. So, okay, so racists in this country said, oh, these people then are not fit, so we don't want them to produce other unfit. So they came up with sterilization of people back in the day who tested low on IQ tests. We don't want to have more of those, so they would sterilize them. And I think they still do that in some states. Yeah, they sterilized women who said, we don't want you to have any more babies because, you know, you're retarded, they're gonna be retarded too, you know? So that has to do with number 4, you know, the prejudice that people have, you know, against people of color. Question? Yes.
I wanted to respond to the comment a little earlier about, social adjustment, but I think, you know, we're talking about the history of Larry P. And so in California, the problem was they weren't educating them for reading, writing, and math, and they weren't just even bothering with them. It was more just to push them along, going back to the whole, that's the history, right, right, yeah. So, but what you're talking about is legitimate in that Larry P. has moved down the hall to the ED classroom. So if you look at the numbers in California or around the country, ED is now where they're putting students in, and they're denying the consistency of white supremacy. If I can keep it very particular, if I follow Derek Bell's critical race theory model, it's every 25 years you have a pushback back and forth. And the consistency, they'll just keep flipping, twisting, and turning. And the twist and turn was, well, now you're ED, we ain't gonna give you academics, right?
Absolutely.
So.
Now I understand, so this is from it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because right now, for example, emotional intelligence is the one, so that they're starting, we're gonna talk contemporarily, the concern is now we need you to know how to get along with people, EQ or EI, as opposed to IQ. This is a historical, IQ is the important thing, the focus.
Okay, and that's important for the audience, you know, that's not how it's currently being done.
Right.
And I might use you
We'll
and say,
get
you
there.
came in late.
Anticipate.
I might that's something, you know what, it's okay. That's okay, so this is the part where, all right. Then you go back. Yeah, I went back just for,
Okay, go back to the one that tells about the students.
This one, the history?
Yeah, okay, that one.
This one.
Yeah, that one.
I'm saying, yeah, so this brother right here is the one, the context.
Yeah, there were 5 students that were selected for the class action suit in San Francisco. They were Darrell Lester, who is, you know, that's a pseudonym for Larry P. Larry P is a pseudonym for Darrell Lester. The other students, Sylvie, Marie Walker, James Lanigan, Michael Sears, and John Harvey. And those are the expert witnesses for plaintiffs. Asa Hilliard, Dean of Education at San Francisco State, Gerald West, Professor of Counseling at San Francisco State, Bill Pierce, and I'd like to introduce, they were all at Westside Community Mental Health, and we're fortunate today we have the director of Westside Mental Health, and Dr. Mary Ann Jones.
All right.
Thank you for coming to give your support. Okay. All right. Next slide.
So you think you went over a little bit?
Yeah, I'm going over that one.
Okay.
Okay, now I think it's okay. We can play the tape. Larry P. Darrell Lester was brought to San Francisco last month because they did kind of a memorial or whatever, 30-year after thing, and they brought Larry P. back to be a.
So you want the voice memo?
Yeah, the one that I played,
I need you to
the
bring
last
that
one.
to bring it with time and timed out. Forgive us. So there's
Oh, that's this one, yeah.
there's a voice.
The last one.
Okay. Let's see. Now,
Yeah, this is Larry P. today. He's 60 years old. And so we're going to hear him talk about what has happened to him since he was in classes. He was a member of the class action too.
Elder, I think it's without the, another apparatus, I don't think it's gonna.
Oh, I know why.
Oh.
Now, it should play now.
You guys hear?
You guys can do that.
No.
Students were the corner that were black, even though African Americans made up less than 10% of the student body. A year before the judge ruled SFUSD.
I'm gonna go back to the beginning, okay, so you have context and you get.
Daryl's 60 years old now and still lives in Tacoma. He never knew his pseudonym was Larry P, and he has no idea that the case had lasting impact, but he remembers everything about his schooling. Athletic to native, it feels big. Enrollment in the special ed category of educable mentally retarded peaked statewide in 1968 at nearly 60,000 students. More than a quarter of them were black, even though African Americans made up less than 10% of the student body. The year before the judge ruled SFUSD's ratio was even more extreme. Half the kids in that category were black. The judge had said the whole class of plaintiffs was mistreated, robbed of an education. I want to know about the scars these kids have carried. Hi. Hi. I'm Lee. I'm Daryl. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too. And Daryl, no one's ever tracked down until now. He has answers. We settled in on the plush section of Soho to talk. Daryl and his wife live in a housing project that was redeveloped into a neighborhood of two-story townhouses. Their place is homey, covered in family photos.
That picture there was 4th of July that we had a guy draw us for $25. He did a good job. Other stuff is just decoration. You know, we tried to liven the place up a little bit and spice it up.
I pull out the ruling in the Larry P case, nearly 90 pages long.
My case.
Yeah, this is your case. And I read to him about how the IQ test they use allegedly results in the misplacement of black children in special classes that doom them to stigma, inadequate education, and failure to develop the skills necessary to productive success in our society. Daryl's nodding. He says memories of school have been popping in his brain since I called. He and his mom and brothers moved to San Francisco from Marietta, Georgia, right before 1st grade.
Because she didn't want to find us dead one day hanging by a tree or whatever, you know, because it was still going on.
He fell behind fast.
There was just certain things I couldn't read when it came to reading these stuff. Other stuff I did fine. I was very good at math.
So Daryl did have a learning difficulty, a really specific one. He needed help with reading. He never got it, but he did get teased. He got angry, and he got suspended a lot. That's common. Black students in special ed, especially boys, are kicked out of the classroom more than just about any other student group. Still.
They said that I was illiterate. You making me feel like you're so high above me that I'm beneath you. That's gonna make any kid feel bad. You know, he's gonna lash out.
When the family moved to public housing in Hunters Point to be close to Daryl's new school, his education got even worse.
I walked to school and cried all the way. I just didn't like it, you know, because they wouldn't teach us nothing.
Lots of recess time and field trips, Daryl says, but pretty much no instruction. Daryl didn't know it at the time, but his mom was one of the black parents working to sue the district. He never got any benefit from that, though, because in 1971, the year the Larry P case was filed, Mom took the boys and moved north to Tacoma. Remember how the judge said kids placed in dead-end classes fall further and further behind? Well, that's what happened to Daryl. Before starting at his new high school, he took placement tests.
I failed. So they said, well, okay, we're going to put you in special aid and half-day program. Well, what's that? Well, you get up in the morning and you're going to go over to Safeway. Safeway, the grocery store? And they said, yeah, that's going to help you with your credits.
Daryl worked for free from 7:30 to 11 a.m. every morning before attending a few classes in the back of the high school.
Is you all here?
Yeah. It reminded me when I was in elementary school also. And I remember when I was going to an all-black school, first grade, and then they integrated schools. So we went to the all-white school, and excuse me, because that just resonates within me right now, because now I think about it, you was asking about learning while black. So they put us in the school, and I remember my mom telling me, you know, she knew what was going on, but we didn't, and basically it was 7 of us as far as kids, but my sister, myself, and my younger brother of the first 3 were the ones that went to the integrated schools. So when we got there, the first day my mom was saying, okay, we're going to go to a new school. She didn't say you're going to go to a white school. She said you're going to go to a new school. And she said, well, just remember one thing, son. Just remember, treat people the way you want to be treated, and everything will be all right. Well, then, of course, most of you guys are in the 60s or late 50s, you understand that part in terms of all the fighting and the struggle. So we went through all that also. But it was a particular day in the 2nd grade, the principal called me into the office. And I didn't know why I was going to the office. I didn't do anything, but he called me in the office, and then he started asking me all these questions. And I didn't know what it was at that time, but what he was doing word association. So he's asking me these questions, you know, and to give him the first thing that comes to my mind, and, you know, so I'm going like, okay, what is, you know, I'm saying to myself, I remember sitting there going like, well, what is this for?
Wow.
Right? And then he didn't say anything at the end of the whole thing. He just sent me back to my room. So I'm sitting there going like, okay, I wonder what that was about. And then I remember saying to myself, are they trying to put me in special ed? I remember saying that. When we was talking about this, right, that's what came back up. You know, I remember saying to myself, I wonder if they're trying to put me in special ed or something. And then that whole process of saying, am I stupid or am I dumb or what's going on? So at the end of that year, I'm out of the maybe 25 or so of the black kids that was in the school, more than half of them were set back. So you had to repeat I had to repeat the 2nd grade. Okay? And I remember the conversation between the teacher, my mom, and the principal, and they were debating about, well, we could move him on to 3rd grade, but he may not do well in the 3rd grade, so we need to go ahead and send him back. And so my mom's going, are you sure? Well, we could move him there. You know, here I am sitting there going like, well, I want to pass with my class. Right? Well, we could move him there, but it would be better for him if you just let us hold him back. Right? So I grew up with that whole thing in terms of that part right there. And I remember crying and saying to my mom, you know, they said I could go, but you won't let me go, so I'm holding it against my mom.
Wow.
Right? So when he was talking about that, I was going like, yeah, I remember that whole process during that time period for that.
I had I have a friend who's deceased now, but about at that same time, he was IQ tested, and then he was placed in a what they call educably mental retarded class. And he said he can remember sitting in that class with other students who were so retarded, as he said, that they drooled. And he was saying to himself, you know, why they put me here? I don't belong here. And, you know, and so fast forward, you know, 15 or 20 so years, he got his master's in addiction, counseling, kind of thing. But he said that just stuck with me. He said, I can still see myself sitting in that class with those kids that were drooling and knew that I did not belong there.
Right.
The other issue is my daughter was had some emotional problems, so she was placed in special ed classes because her social skills they considered to be in depth, and she was causing a lot of disruptions and whatever. But she got through school. She didn't like the fact that she had to have a kind of like a coach, somebody that followed her from class to class. She didn't like that, but she endured. She got through. She completed all her classes, but I think she was so upset with what she had to go through, she refused to take the, what's it called, end of school test, EAP, or whatever that test is called, before they give you your diploma. She completed all her credits.
Right.
She was a graduate of that high school, but they would not hand her the diploma until she took that test. So I had to go to the school board. They made the school reissue the test to her when she was 21. And they reissued the test to her, and she went ahead and she did a half effort. But they said, okay, you put forth an effort, here's your diploma.
Okay.
Wow.
That tells you about the validity of the test, yes.
I am a contemporary of Larry P. And this is not my memory, but my mother's memory, because she was a K through 12 educator, not in my school, but in the district. And she tells me that I came home really excited about this new book I had gotten, new math book I'd gotten. And she looked at it and she realized it was not on grade. And then when she began to investigate, I had been placed in an EDVD school, classroom with all boys. She said, get my daughter out. She said, I don't care, mainstreamer, I don't care if she fails. You put her in mainstream. And so I don't know whether I was even tested. I don't know what kind of circumstances surrounded it. But I'm grateful that I had an advocate. Because I think most of us don't get that advocacy.
Yeah, we're getting there. Yeah.
And I'll just share one point about Larry P. as well. I started first grade. Well, I skipped kindergarten, went straight to first grade, so I was delayed in reading, so I didn't read as well as my classmates. And of course, but they allowed me to stay within mainstream classroom, gave me a different book, and I excelled. And I only knew that I was reading from a different book when I moved from one school district in Augusta, Georgia to Charleston, South Carolina. And when I saw that the text that the other students were reading was dense and my text was bigger, so I told my teacher, I protested. I was like, I can't, that's not my book, and I refuse to be placed in be judged by a book that was beyond what I felt my capabilities were. But yet, I remediated my reading challenges, but I was good in math. So when I heard Larry P. say he was great in math, I absolutely excelled in math because in ninth grade, my 8th grade teacher said, why didn't you have Algebra 1 in 8th grade? And I said, I didn't know that was an option. Right. So she said, I tell you what, you're going to take geometry and accelerated Algebra 2 in 10th grade so that you can take Algebra 3 in 11th grade and take calculus before you graduate because, you should consider going into engineering because you're good in math and science. So never mind the fact that I wasn't as well as I should have been in English, but that math, and we know many of our students are great in math. Either, dynamic strength in reading, afraid of math, or dynamic strength in math and may not be do as well in English. So I got my degree in mechanical engineering, and then after working as an engineer for 3 years, I said, I gotta go back and get my degree in psychology. So I applied to Howard, got accepted, and because I have reading comprehension challenges, I just read the material 1, 2, 3 times over. Graduated from Howard University with a 3.94 GPA because I knew how to compensate, right? And so, so Larry P. no telling what he could have been. But the
Exactly.
persons had known that his strengths were in math, and you could remediate reading, just get you on the right level, and learn, excel, compensate, because that's what we know IQ tests are designed for. You do the IQ test, and you look at where the strengths are, and then you help them to utilize the strengths to overcome any challenges, right? Pattern analysis and the like. So, yeah, so we have many Larry P's out there, but who's telling them what they're good at versus where they struggle?
That's what I hope to hear from different people, learning off life.
You know, yes.
One of the things that resonated with me when Larry P. was talking, he talked about the teacher looking down on him. You know, and this is what happens a lot. Teachers, they don't think about the proverb, what is it, people who live in glass houses should not throw stones. They don't get down at the level of a student and establish rapport. You know, I'm up here, and he was saying, this made me feel, did you hear how he said, made me feel I didn't want to be in this situation where you're looking down at me. So that's an implication for us if we want to work with people, you know, and help them. We need to establish rapport, get down at their level, and see life as they see it, and then we could be more effective in remediating whatever the difficulty is. You agree?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Nunley.
So, I'm gonna go back to each of the comments, and I'll start with you, young man. So, you talked about the third grade, that was like this key point. So, I don't know if you are all aware, because again, I'm an educator, so I come from kind of a different lens. So, when you get into third grade, the third grade that's where you read to learn. Before that, you are learning to read. So third grade is a critical, important grade level. But what happened to you, many times we say that students drop out, you were being pushed out already. And so, but when you look at the data, it's just like, oh, they just went away from school, they just dropped out. No, you were being pushed out. And so, thank God it didn't work. It didn't work, right? And now we go over to you, my sister, where you talked about your brother being in the classroom where other children were actually drooling and how that made him. So that's really, that's hard because these are your peers. So what is that saying about you? It's like, and you're like, well, shouldn't I be drooling too? Right? Because when you're a young child, you want to fit in. So you can imagine you start picking up behaviors of the other children, right? And imagine if that's your child and your child's coming home and doing some things that it's like, ooh, where did that come from, right? So, general education, where was the person that the parents advocate said, oh, your mama wasn't happening. So put you right back in general ed. That doesn't happen a lot of times. What happens many times is a school is this scary, scary place for Black parents because of their own experiences. And so they don't want to go back there. They don't want to deal with that. The teacher's guide is like, oh, it's too painful. It triggers too much. So you're very, very fortunate too. And then we got to my sister here. So because you were gifted in a particular domain, you got to hang out and be included with everyone else. And it probably helped a lot that your gender was not, and you've always, friendly, smiling. I'm sure you're that same little girl, right? As opposed to my darker brother, that's, so. And teacher expectation. So this is what we go back to. I have to give you a little bit of history about special education teachers, first of all. Originally, to be a special education teacher, you were just the brand new teacher, the green one that didn't know anything. So a special education teacher then is just like a new teacher. There wasn't this particular training and an expertise. So that's not how it even started. Now, special education teachers have different expertise, and they actually make more money, different training, et cetera. If you look at information about special teacher expectation, special education, black children, et cetera, there is this missing group of special education teachers, and you can imagine who they are. Who do you think they are? African Americans, but what gender? Males, right? So they are missing in the equation, but you can't get them there if they're not in the pipeline. I have been teaching almost 20 years, and I'm a teacher educator, and I have taught at, right now I'm at San Francisco City College, I've taught at Mills College, San Francisco State, Berkeley City College, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I've taught thousands and thousands and thousands of students. But guess what? I can probably have only taught maybe 20 black males that were preparing to become teacher in education. What is that? There's none in the pipeline. That's problematic.
Why is that?
Yeah, why is that? Why do you think? Well, go ahead.
I think one thing is that
A little louder, brother.
a lot of black men come forward into education. They don't have a positive experience at school. So why would you want to be educated if it's been something that's been oppressive to you your whole life?
There you go.
Struggle against you. I was myself a teacher educator. I was in undergrad. I had a license to teach in North Carolina. Unfortunately, I pursued a degree in school psychology instead of teaching high school education. That was the experience that I had as a student teacher that year was more so to try to empower the students, the black kids that I had in my class to become teachers as well. And it's a wonderful experience because I look back on the relationships that I built with them. I stayed in touch with some of the students I had, and to see 3 out of the 4 black men that I had in my psychology class that I was teaching. Right now, apparently social studies teachers. So if there's just I was the first black male teacher that they had. So it's just if you have one good experience, it's really changed the trajectory and the outcome of that demographic and the lack of black teachers. You just have one good experience there.
You also have the issue of just a black male that makes it past high school.
Right.
To even think about moving on. But also, I think if we had more black males in the regular class, we would have fewer black males in special ed also.
You're right, the pool, yeah, that's
So overall, we don't have enough.
So, as I said, I've about 20 years, but I also teach in the jail, in the county jail. And when I teach in the county jail, then I have all my brothers. All my brothers. And that's sad because guess what? They're not eligible to teach because they can't pass the criminal background check. And I remember the first time I went to San Quentin prison. San Quentin is a prison in California. And I went to San Quentin with some other teacher educators, and I'm gonna be real honest. So this is when I was a student training, and I'm like, oh snap, I'm gonna go up here with all these little white girls. And one of them brothers is gonna be like, hey, Patricia, right? So I said, let me just be real, right? And I said, okay, so you guys, some people may call my name and stuff, and it's like, because, I have a whole life, I partied, I had a good time, right? And so, sure enough, somebody was like, yo, Patricia, right? So anyway, what was very sad about that experience in going to San Quentin is a bus happened to roll up at the time, and they were letting like the new inmates off the bus. It was like, oh my God, you should have saw all the black brothers pouring off of there. It was very, very, very painful. And I asked, and then we sat down and talked to some brothers, and I said, can you tell me what I can do so that I can, I said, I'm an early education teacher at that time, and I said, tell me what I can do so that I don't have to come here to see you. And they said, well, we just needed a teacher that cared, and nobody cared about us. They said, so all you got to do is care. It's like, oh, you got that because you me. But yeah, it was very important that students believe that the teachers care about them. But as you know, what actually happens, teachers lower the expectations. And once you lower the expectation, if you look at all the data on student success, the continued common denominator is a good teacher. So it doesn't matter about your parents supporting you, your gender, the common denominator for student success is a good teacher, and we don't have a lot of those. So I don't want to let you, so I don't, does anybody want to say any more? Because this.
Thanks for sharing all the stories. I was getting the through point, and Amos Wilson was talking to me. Right? There's a talk he does on YouTube I like to watch about zombies. Right? And he says that white supremacy acts like a zombie, tries to take your mind, tries to take your spirit, right? It tried to take that system tries to take your spirit, tries to take control of it. And there's times where I was working with students, I felt like I had to push back against that, where I have a student, they tell him he's in special ed, he says, he's listing all these colleges he wants to go to. He's in 9th grade. And there's this white woman there who's administrator. She said, okay, slow down. You're probably only going to go to community college. I mean, we're at your IEP. And I said, hold up. And the rest of the team, and some of it, we've been working together a little while, and they said, you're going to have to step outside, man. And we just let them know, here, we don't take students' dreams. Right? We let them hold on to them as long as they can, as long as they need to, and we're going to fight for them. So I don't know where you from, but you're going to get it right before you step back in here. And so, and just to round out the story, he just earned his doctoral degree from the same place I earned my doctoral degree. He was one of my mentees, right? So like but I didn't realize we were going to go that far together. I just knew you ain't going to crush his dreams today. Right? So that spiritual warfare cloaked in psychometrics, right, is very real and direct. And sometimes you may feel it and you just got to speak to it or at least speak up for the young people. So.
Community college.
You said a good teacher.
Yeah.
And so I want to get your definition.
Yeah.
Oh.
Right.
You stole my thunder.
Okay, so a good teacher is a teacher who I'm going to treat you like you're my child. And I want the best for my child, so I want the best for you. For example, when I was teaching at a Black Christian school, it was like one of my first teaching assignments, when it was a Black head of school, and what he made all the teachers do, it's like, you have children? How old are they? Your children must attend this school too. Because if this school is good enough for you to make your money off of, you know, and so that's what I mean by treat them like your own children. Because I don't want mine to fail. Yeah. So a good teacher is someone who does that. And community college, I gotta say something, because right now that's where I'm on the tenure track at community college. And this is the danger. I intentionally chose community college. Community college, if you look at the data and the statistics, it is a revolving door. Over and over again. It's like, so when you are less likely, and I'm talking about for everybody, la-di-da-di, everybody, if you attend a community college, you are less likely to go on to a 4-year college. And because I know that, I push hard and remind all of my students, it's like, you know what, now see, you're supposed to be here just so, because it's cheaper here. Right. And because you're going to get somebody like me that's going to sit here and show you how to use a textbook. But you're not supposed to keep coming back here, boo-boo, right? Let's make sure you got a counselor and that you are getting, everything is transferable. And I purposely teach the core courses, the hard stuff, and do all this stuff. So community college can be a trap for our children. That's all I'm saying. So just be very careful because, so anyway,
thank you.
I want to talk to you. Okay.
Yeah.
Come on and join. Oh. Okay.
The focus on IQ tests in the suit, that is the class action suit, was so strong that people neglected to look at other variables that might influence success or failure in the schools. And Dixie Hilliard mentioned these in one of the articles he wrote, and he talked about there not being a universal definition of school, that everybody says school, but you couldn't find any studies that showed where there was a consistent or valid definition of school. by the same token, there was no definition of instruction. That different teachers, different strokes for different folks. I mean, that's, and read, yeah. So, and then the next one, I'll just make a brief statement, you can take over. How many of you saw Black Klansman? Okay. The part that I want to refer to is when the detective was talking to David Duke, the Klansman, and the detective, who was black, said, how do you know somebody black is not, I'm somebody black trying to infiltrate the Klan? And David Duke said, well, I know you're intellectual. I can tell the way you're talking. You speak proper good English, so to speak. And so it so happened that Stalwart, that's his name, was smart. So he said, what if I was black and was trying to infiltrate? He says, I know how black people talk. And he said, they don't say, A-R-E, they don't say R, they say ah-rah. So, did y'all get it?
Yes.
Yeah, and so that's the code. And I've heard a lot of, read about a lot of studies where it shows that to the extent that black kids can switch codes, they do better, stop talking, quote, Ebonics, and speak standard English. So, yeah, so when, well, that speaks to it right there, number two, that we have to understand the code and the context in which a person says. For example, he asked a question on the test. What would you do if a kid much smaller than you starts to fight with you? What's the answer? To get credit, what must you say? Huh? You don't fight him. But my mama said, if anybody, don't start a fight, but you end it, So, okay, all right. So, in order to understand the person you're teaching, you got to know the code that they're using.
So I want to go back to the data on language. I want to go back to language. I remember when I was teaching at Mills College, that's a PWI, predominantly white institution, feminist college, et cetera, et cetera. And I was teaching a language acquisition class. And I think I inherited from somebody who was on sabbatical. But anyway, I said, oh, this is going to be fun when I get to Ebonics, right? Because Mama Vera, so Dr. Vera Nobles, Baba Wade's wife, right? So she's a linguist, right? So I'm like, I'm bringing her up in the camp. I can't wait, right? So I bought her and she did this beautiful lecture. Now, Mills College is rich white girls from suburbia, right? And I'm like the first black professor ever. And I'm always like this loud, colorful. It's like, oh God, you got Dr. Nunley, they call me Black Power Walking, right? When I say so it's like, so anyway, I had Mama Vera come to talk. And, she did an excellent job making the case that Ebonics is a language, et cetera, et cetera. So she had all her beautiful stuff. And then one of the students said, after she said, Dr. Nunley, because these were master's students, so they had to do their capstone. And she said, Dr. Nunley, can I study you? I'm like, study me? Why you want to study me, right? And she said, because you speak Ebonics and you're smart. And she said, and the two didn't match, and now I understand. I said, go on, baby, study me. Yeah. So language is really important because when we continue, we think we connect language and cognition, but we're talking the European bastard, we're talking English, which is a bastard. I can go on. Y'all know that, right? So we think when you speak what I call the academic or market language, that you are then intelligent automatically, and that's what you were just speaking to. So, yeah, so it's very, so I just thought that's a funny story every time I see it. It's funny, one more, then I'm gonna leave Mills alone. When Black Panther first came out, I made them go see Black Panther, then the white students like, Dr. Mel, he charged our Lord. I'm like, good job, all right, anyway. So the other limitation. Because I felt it was very important that we talk culture with them, because these are the teachers, they go teach our little Black children. And Baba Wade would tell me, okay, Patricia, this is your job. You're supposed to teach the white teachers to do less harm, and Black teachers do no harm. Why is that? Because the Black teacher, we're going back to the teacher expectation, if I'm a Black teacher and I'm teaching a Black person, I look like your auntie, your mom, et cetera, et cetera. And so when I hurt you, the hurt is even deeper. So for a Black teacher, there is a higher expectation when you're teaching a Black student. And I even noticed I talk to them differently, and I'm so bad, because the older I get, the harder it is for me to hide who I am, and sometimes when I should. So I just, like at the beginning of the semester, look, if you Black, I'm telling you, I'm going to talk to you a certain way. I'm going to be harder on you all. Yeah, it's not fair. The bar is higher for you because I need more Black doctors like me. Okay, y'all got that? So this is why. And then everybody's looking, it's like, yeah, I mean that.
I just want to say that I graduated from Yale College, and I have a degree in chemistry, and the dean called me in and told me that I should change my major.
See?
And she would be worried about the healthcare fields if I ever became a doctor.
See, now check that out. Yeah. It Mills, yeah, and I'm where all the rich white girls read, wait, the freeway, since you know that, okay, so the freeway, there's one freeway up here, 580, and then there's another freeway, so the freeway that's by the college, trucks cannot go on that freeway because you don't want to disturb the sleeping girls. I mean, Mills has such history in rich white girls. Anyway, right. I digress. All right, so there was limitations to the study, and here's another one. This study that my elder conducted, there's no data on the impact of IQ instructions, no data on the impact of special education, no data on the impact of successful teaching, no data on early sensory motor development of African American children. This is like very, very important. Number 7 is really, really important, because basically now we say that there's 3 basic learning styles, right? Auditory, visual, and kinesthetic. And we tend to be kinesthetic learners, like you see how I'm moving around and all, you see how elder moves, etc., right? So in my classroom, I'm making everybody move, so you're very comfortable if you are basically a Black person. Everybody else is a little bit uncomfortable, but it's like, that's okay. Y'all can get with this too, because you're training to teach. Most of the time, y'all kind of go teaching my children, so we need to learn how my children learn best. So, let's see. Then there's all the study also. There's no experiential study of differential treatment. Differentiated learning. When you were saying that you were good at math, and so there was an area that you were good in, and so now we understand differentiated learning. Back then they did not, so he didn't have that advantage. And that's it. I think he's back home. Yeah, let me do this.
Yeah, what lessons have we learned in the 30 years since Larry P. and PASE? The first one is the existing IQ testing system is used in education is a ranking and classification system, as is DSM-5. It is not a diagnostic and remedial system. So as I said, those of you who do clinical work, if you use DSM-5, person meets all the criteria of depression, okay, you diagnose them. But how do you remediate the depression? What's your orientation? Is your orientation Freudian? Is your orientation existentialism? So you gotta have that many people. They just come and don't have the slightest idea how to approach people who are different. For example, the other day, I had a white male patient, and he came and he said he was a Christian. And he said to me, after I got to know him, I trust you. He said, are you a Christian? He said, why is he asking me that question? I said, why do you want to know? He said, well, this is because I'm getting to know you, and I want to be able to tell you things, you know. And so I said, well, I better get down to his level. I said, I go to church. And he said, do you believe in God? I said, yes, I believe in God, but I never had a patient ask me that before. So, in other words, there was proximity here. I was getting down to his level so he could trust me, I could establish rapport and be effective, you know, in helping him to deal with his symptoms. So that's what that proximity is all about. Yeah. The next one is I was talking to Brother Gamble this morning about a patient we see in common, and the question was, how can you diagnose or assess a child when you don't use tests? And so he did an excellent job, but the parent rejected it because there was no test in there. So that's a challenge that we're going to have to do, is diagnose without using a test. And how you do that, you got to go into the home, you got to go to the church, you can't be afraid to go into the community after dark, right, and see what the student's life is like, you know, if you really want to be effective. So that speaks to number two.
The definition of intelligence.
Yeah, I told you about the rubber band. Everybody heard that one?
Yeah.
You didn't hear it?
Yeah.
Okay, well, Robert Williams, Dr. Robert Williams, who wrote the BITS test, he defined intelligence, it's like the phenomenon of 3 rubber bands of different sizes, large, medium, and small. And he said that each of us are born with potential, some with the large potential, some with medium, and some with small. But the environment determines how much we achieve within those rubber bands. So that's the definition of intelligence, the rubber band, okay? But there are, how many definitions of intelligence are there? You know, any number. So there's no reliability of the definition.
The IEPs.
The court cases increase the psychologists and other individual education plan IEP team members' attention to issues in racial inequality. And the gentleman back there talked about the IEP. Before Larry P., there was not near as much attention to the disabilities that people have. So that raised the consciousness of the nation, and white parents demanded change in education for disabled children. President Kennedy's wife started that Olympics, what's it called? Special Olympics, and white parents took advantage of these new programs, and they become advocates, more, how can we say, sophisticated in using than, because many of the black people were afraid of the school, so they didn't go, but white people, oh, my daughter needs horseback riding, and they got it in the IEP. My daughter needs to go to the tennis club and play tennis, and they paid for the tennis club membership. So this was it shows you what could be done with the new changes. So what is needed is to teach black parents how to advocate. And some schools have advocates that black parents can go to and feel comfortable, because they may be afraid of the teachers or afraid of the principal, afraid of the school, because they'll look down on me. No, nobody wants to be looked down on, you know?
Right.
Okay. And that's
And
five.
the disproportionate representation of American students in special ed.
Okay, needs to be.
Alter, readdress. Did you want to go over that or no?
Or you can skip that.
Skip that.
Now, have you addressed
Let's stop.
on number 4 again, in terms of the case increased the school psychologist, I understand, but in the, again, in the Denver public school areas, it seems that the psychologists are inundated with the tests and the paper and da-da-da. And so they're not really being effective in terms of what's going on in the that part in terms of counseling and taking care of stuff in the school. Do you have any comment on that, or any recommendations to kind of help to alleviate some of that, or what might need to be done?
I can speak in general to that, because different, people have different ways of dealing with things. I'm thinking of Julia Hare was speaking to a group of black so-called leaders at one time, and she said, there are 3 kinds of people. There are those who are unaware, they're in the fog, don't care what's happening. And there are people who know what's happening, but they don't do anything. And there are people who make things happen. And says, which one are you? That each of you can be a leader. You don't have to follow the leader that white press gave you. You can be a leader. You can make things happen. I don't know if that addresses your question. Yes.
I just want to touch on that for a second, because I work for a city of Atlanta and have horses, so I totally understand what you're talking about. But what I encourage people to do, parents, psychologists, members of the community, pastors, whoever, is to become active, because we're currently in the middle of a mental health crisis around the nation. This is the time to put this on the forefront, because people are willing to listen. Contact the school board, and let them know your concerns as a member of the community. That's where you start. Also your local legislature. Contact them to let them know that you demand, an increase for the safety of children. So you do have a voice, but it needs to be people outside of the school to talk. But definitely hit your school board with the data, with the articles, talk about the mental health crisis in the country, and let them know that it is unacceptable for psychologists to have that caseload, because we need to focus on children.
Are you so you're talking Georgia, you're talking Colorado?
Correct.
One of the things that's happening for us in California is being trauma informed. So that's the TI. So I'm just telling you, I make a whole bunch of money on the side, going around doing trauma, making you a trauma informed educator. And because I'm a member of the Association of Black Psychologists, it carries even more weight. But there is a big focus now on being trauma informed. And so they are thinking about the mental health, that part of it. I want to go back to on the IEP. So an IEP, the Individualized Education Plan. I don't know, this was some years ago. I was sitting on Policy Link. I was working with them, and because of my specialty in the area of early education with black boys, they had tapped me to look at some things. And anyway, what we discovered, which was very, very disturbing, was that if you came before the juvenile justice system and you had an IEP, the judge was more likely to be harsher on you. So it was better if you were general ed as opposed to special ed.
Wow.
So now what does that do? So we sent that message out there. So what did that do? That scared a lot of parents from, it's like, oh snap, I don't want my child getting put in special ed. And maybe you really need it to be. We're talking about how disproportionately you place it, but maybe you really need it, so now you're afraid to do it, right? And also, special ed became stigma for white people. It's like, oh snap, this is for black folks. So what I encourage parents to do, there's something called a 504. That's the white people's IEP, right? So the 504 plan is what happens is the whole class gets special education, okay? So then you don't have the individual label, but your class is getting that special help. So that I call it, so 504 is the white people IEP. So it's crazy. You got to understand the game and know how to play it. And then another thing, I was set on a school design team. We were trying to create a community school, 100 black men community school. It was not successful. But anyway, one of the things we went in saying, we're not going to have any special education. We're not having it just because of their, it's like we're not doing it. Well, unfortunately, like about a month or two in, we said, oh dang, some people really, really need special ed, right? So I say that to say that it can be beneficial, but you have to really pay attention and know what you're doing, because it could have some negative effects too, because it's hard to step out of it, so it's still a work in California. I don't know, is that now in Colorado and Atlanta? Because I'll even like the IEP, like when you're having an IEP meeting, because I'm at my church, they're like, oh, Sister Nunley in education. It's like, I'll come and go, right? And I sit there and I'm the way I am. Don't say nothing, let them just say whatever. And it's like, excuse me, my name is Dr. Nunley. And boom, 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 this is what you need to do on the education side. And I know a little bit about psychology too. So this is what you do on that side, right? And then I'm a mama, so it is, the community can help, like the community experts that know some things that are the quote professionals that the white people respect, because we got the labels and all of that. That's important, because a lot of times the parents, when you come to your meeting, our parents feel really bad, they're embarrassed, it's a horrible thing. It's like, oh God, I didn't raise my child well, and then they let that team do anything to the children. So
I would add, in California, they have a state review. So if your district is found out of compliance, then you have to follow, a set of actions that you have to take in order to get back in compliance. So if you have too many kids that are disproportionately placed in special ed, then your district has to maybe bring in members of the Association of Black Psychologists. That doesn't always happen, and like you said, you need advocacy to get that to be on the table, but they may have to do some other training, so they may have to do trauma-informed care, like the Compton School District got sued, and all their administrators have to be trained on trauma-informed care. So there may be very particular requirements that happen. The other thing I talk with school psychs about, and particularly in California, is not trauma-informed care, their approach avoidance. So you have white folks who go, I know it's bad, but I don't know what to do.
yes.
So I just, I don't you think I should have my IQ test back and be able to do the IQ test so I would know what to do? And I say to them, that's lovely. That's nice that you care that much about black children. My sense would be, and going back to a lot what you were talking about, you would have good treatment validity and a good plan and an idea. And also, I don't know, maybe talk to black parents a whole lot more than you're doing now, so you have context for what you're about to suggest to them and their child. High quality, and this is, and I'll beat them over the head with this, high quality interventions are a whole lot better than a half-done mediocre IQ test.
Right.
So have deep, conversations with black parents, deep, political action even. If you think this is a really big problem, and I hear you, you're a bleeding heart, I hear you, you need to get out there and actually follow through with what you say you're doing. So that those high quality interventions, one way or the other, whether you're in special ed, whether you got the 504 plan, or whether you stay in general ed,
Right.
What are you doing to address this mental health crisis? Because clearly it's a mental health crisis if you're putting all these black children in ED. Somebody should be up in arms, but it doesn't seem to be that you actually care. So.
I'll wait it up. I think it reminds me of a funny story about quality interactions with black people, black parents. This was who told this story? I think somebody was hilarious, where this white student was training in psychology or something, and she was meeting with the black child, and the parent never showed up. Finally, the parent shows up, and the parent is doing this the whole time, right? And then the student is like, oh, okay, now I understand what's wrong with the child. Because the mom, she has tics. Mom just got her hair braided, okay?
Right.
So even understanding, so even when you meet with a black parent, you may come away thinking still with some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. Ask questions. Ask questions.
I've had a few of those experiences. I was actually in the system with Larry P. I was working.
Okay.
And I've been out for a little while, so I don't know exactly what's going on now, but when Larry P. came out, and I was in the white backlash county from Richmond City, and they had this door talk about what is IQ. If you were in the West End and you were black, your IQ could be as high as 80, 85, and you were EMR. If you were in the East End, you could be a 70 or whatever, and you were EMR. But we were, the state came down on us. I think we spent 2 or 3 years retesting these kids who have been placed in special ed and bringing them out. Now, the sad thing is, when you are a junior in high school and you've been in special ed since you were in 3rd grade, what do we do with you? I mean, it was just a really heart-wrenching kind of a situation, because those kids were no way were they going to meet any kind of standard for graduation in the regular ed. And honestly, it's kind of an individual case kind of a thing, but it was, Larry P. was wonderful for after that, but it certainly was difficult on some of us. We developed this whole system of, home visits, what's that, the questionnaire you ask, I forget what you call it, the whole, and the social and the medical.
Oh, I know what you're talking about, I can't think of the name.
Yeah. And, we had kids in our severely handicapped program who were at hearing loss, because nobody bothered to check their hearing.
Oh my God.
And they were just stuck in this building over here, totally out of the way.
And see, in early education, that's what we train the teachers is this, okay, you are the first person that's not a parent to actually see the child, and you know what typical development looks like. And so early intervention is the best intervention, right? So you have an opportunity to say things like, maybe the child can't hear, maybe they can't see. Just some simple kind of things and catch that early on. But we also are being that kind of gatekeeper. We're the ones that will dump children in special ed disproportionately, because we have a lot of teachers that they don't, unfortunately, in early childhood, they speak English, but they can't really read English. And so now I got this test and I'm scoring children not really knowing how to read English. And when I discovered that was going on, I almost lost my mind, because we're dumping them into special ed. And because luckily at the time I was a center director and I knew the kids, I would come in and see, it's like, nothing's wrong with that child, let me see what's going on. And then I find out the teacher, you don't know how to read English and you're just ticking off boxes and getting that child referred. But then in the referral, why did my psychologist, on that side, the school folks, why didn't you catch that child's normal too? So it's a systemic mess. And so, yeah.
So I don't know I think we're talking about the next step for like Larry P. We know the historical. Now what's the next? Is it going to be revisited? Because from my understanding in California, what's being done right now is not working. It's not effective.
It's not
right. So what's being done to improve the current method of assessing children for special education?
So he's like, now what? So
Yeah.
now we learn from their, we learn from their piece, so now.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
how does
Let's
it-
move to the next slide.
Next slide.
Implication for research and practice.
This is
what you want, right?
Thank you.
Okay, first one states that we need to collect data on the impact of successful teaching that is both valid and reliable. That's what she's been talking about all the time. There are teachers who are role models for teaching, and what we need to do is collect data on these teachers and do research and determine how valid it is and spread it to everybody, The second one, adopt specific standards for determining eligibility for educational delay and serious emotional disturbance, such as identifying conditions that trigger and maintain maladaptive behavior. So how are you going to find out what triggered the child to behave and act in a certain way if you don't establish proximity, go to the home, go to the church, in the community, and maybe there's killing, the child watched somebody get shot, trauma, these are triggers. If you don't know that, you're in the dark.
And what's sad is sometimes the school and the white teacher, the school's the trigger. It's like that's the trigger.
Okay. Learn to make systematic observations of target behavior. I think Brother Campbell can talk about that because you've done some of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
How is that done?
Oh, boy. I think it starts with more hypothesis-driven pieces, and a lot of times, but that goes to a really in-depth questionnaire, like on adaptive behavior or particular behavior issues. For those who are familiar with the BASC and the developmental questionnaire, I do that, and sometimes that takes me 2 hours, but it saves me 3, right? In that I'm able to get into what the parents are looking for to be able to show that their child is doing well, and compare that to what the teachers are looking for to show that their child is doing well. And I ask questions differently than what's wrong all the time too. So I put that within the hypothesis to get at it when I'm doing the observation. I think the biggest problem with the Larry P. Court case that stays with me is you had the 6-hour retarded child, right? They were retarded for 6 hours at school. When we went home, they seemed to be able to do magical things like make change, memorize Bible verses, pay attention to a whole church service, take care of their brothers and sisters, all these other adaptive things they were able to do. So I want to make sure that I'm able to get a more holistic approach as well when it comes to the system. But there's still a system to the observation. It isn't just, well, I just did observations. Because there was a period in California where you had to have an observation form filled out, and people would just do it, but they really weren't actually seeing the kid in the classroom. Sometimes they might even send somebody else to go do the observation, and then just include it in their report. So we think like this is hard. How would you even do that? But I had supervisors who just, they'd mail it in, they'd dictate on the phone, or on the little recorder, then they just hand in a report. And some folks would give like a 2 or 3 page report or whatever it was, but they're like, man, I got time. I got tea time over at the country club. I'm done, right? And that was the type of thing that led to the whole Larry P. Court case. So.
Okay, good. We're going to play a tape with another recommendation. And we need help here.
Sure.
So you got jacked up teachers putting them in there wrongfully, and then the psychologists don't do the job. See, it's just our poor children. Take that out.
Okay.
I'm doing something with that. I can do it.
And when they gave that statement, it meant that they could go right into your homes. They went into the black homes now, the powers that be, and told us that you cannot discipline your children anymore. And if you discipline your children, you will go into jail. It's this kind of thing they told us. Now this is amazing that, the black parents go in Africa, that was out of
sir.
And if you,
Yeah.
like Nathan had, the sociology. So that concludes our presentation, and we have the CEU person here who wants to evaluate. What do you do?
Thank you all, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And, Dr. Murray, I was standing in for her, so sorry that.
Right.
Yes.
Just have one question. Do we have time for that?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm a recent graduate, but I had learned about the Larry King case. Thank you.
Yes,
thank you.
yes.
So I'm still new to a lot of this, but we had a conversation in Louisiana about the Larry P case, and some of the folks were suggesting, I guess it was kind of concerned, and me too, I was curious about, well, what are you all's thoughts about new norms for IQ tests, and even creating like new content for IQ tests, because I understand that the history has been problematic and pretty much abusive in many ways, but I'm wondering, like, is there any ways that we can create objective measures?
Well, right now in educate, there's Howard Gardner, white boy. Basically, he's still alive, so he keeps adding new intelligences.
Okay.
So right now he's up to number 9. So there's 9 different intelligence types, but the original is logical mathematical. When you think of intelligence related to school. So now schools are moving toward, there's different types of intelligences. You could be linguistically intelligent, visual, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the IQ test was originally, Binet came up with it, and he came up with this Frenchman, Alfred Binet.
Yeah.
The purpose of that test was to figure out where you need to be supported. And the whole thing got flipped when Stanford took it over. It's like now it's used as an eliminator.
Right.
So if there's a whole different way of thinking about intelligence now, EQ, EI as opposed to IQ, and then Gardner with multiple intelligence. I think his last one is existentialism or something. So but that's what white folks are doing, so we need to be doing stuff.
I just had a couple of announcements. Going back to your questions, right? So the California Association of School Psychologists, along with my colleague, Dr. James Hiramoto, we wrote a updated paper on, and I didn't want it to be associated with Larry P because the way white psychologists say it in California is kind of like a microaggression, and they feel like I can't, give this test, so they say it with the stain on their lips. So I said, all right, we'll call it an African American Student Success paper. So if you look for the California Association of School Psychologists, or CASP, and African American Student Success, we have an updated paper, and our emphasis is to connect with Black parent groups to discuss our assessment practices, because what I find where things break down is the conversation with parents and in the ongoing community about what's happening with the assessment process. So that's going on. The next part is October 24th through 26th. Daryl Lester will be at the California Association of School Psychologists Convention, along with other Black parents from the San Francisco area, as well as the LA area. It will be in Long Beach, California. And I'm gonna, like I'm here recording some things, I'm gonna be recording things there. But I wanted folks to know that the conversation is going on, continuing in California. Again, that's October 24th through 26th. And you can look it up at casponline.org. Or if you want to know more, you can hit me up on my website, drbrandongamble.com.
Yeah, there's a psychologist. Go ahead.
Just about the norming for IQ tests.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they are a norm. They're updated sometimes every up to 10 years or so.
Sometimes even 5.
Or even 5.
Because now they're online now, so.
Exactly. So we do get them updated, like the Stanford Binet. I think right now we're in the 5th edition of Stanford Binet. And just one more thing, I do want to, because I talked to a brother, Justin. He's in, I forget what city in California.
Yeah.
Not many brothers in California.
Right.
Nationally. But I'm talking to him about the option of using nonverbal assessments.
Districts do it. Districts do it already.
Was that districts are doing it?
I will even say they're giving the full range of tests, and they find different reasons, or they redid the test. So you have the DOS, the COS, the NAT, or the NAT. So people are using all these other ones that weren't on the original 20 list.
Okay.
So, and there's many other tests that have come out since then. Right. So they use them But the challenge is sometimes they still use them in the same way. Prescriptive rather than descriptive, right? And yeah.
There are some tests that are more verbally loaded.
Yeah.
And there are some that are, you know, you can use more just kinesthetic,
Yeah.
visual.
Yeah, the other thing, you got patterns of strengths and weaknesses also that's been added to IDEA, and that has taken over California in different ways, but it depends on the district and what the special education local plan area director says, because they're usually trying to follow whatever the district school board lawyer is telling them to do.
That's a part of your discussion.
Yeah.
California lead in education. What California does, it kind of leads the rest of the country in practices related to education. So.
The gentleman in the back, you at Harvard, would you tell us the research you're doing?
So I'm currently accepted this assistant professor position at University of Kentucky, House Education School of Psychology.
Congratulations.
Yes.
I work at Harvard for postdoc. I just returned from my Fulbright.
Yeah.
So what's your research about?
And so my research is on IQ testing, and specifically the predictive relationships that they have to reading. And so I have an article that will hopefully be a special issue soon on looking at Woodcock-Johnson and looking at the CAC theory, how predictive that was for based off of race for reading at the critical age you mentioned around third grade, so from 8 to 11 years old. What I found is that the model, looking at the CDC factors, such as the second order factors, that they're not predictive for any student. Actually, the model just doesn't fit well for any student. So the whole CDC model is actually something that I'm calling the question right now. On if this can work for any student. Because based off of the normal sample I have for the research, normal sample from the test I use for my research. And then also, there was recently an article published about patterns of strengths and weaknesses, and they were going through just the literature of it. This was, I think it was Psychology in the Schools, or Criminal Journal of School Psychology, last year, the article of the year. Was my research, but it's something that I'm thinking about going to the future, is that a lot of the literature isn't scientific. Because what happens is they look at it, they say 80% of literature that supports the pattern of strengths and weaknesses is actually them citing chapters, workshops, not actual scientific studies. So we really have to think about how these things are being put into the hands of these school districts, the decision makers. They're not being backed up by the science, and they.
But it's not evidence-based.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Genius.
I just want to say that I was a school psychologist for 25 years, but I haven't worked in the school in 25 years. So I'm doing mostly clinical work, so I guess you picked that up. I do therapy and, DSM-5 stuff. So Dr. Nunley really filled in, and I had to give her a hand because she just stepped in at the spur of the moment and took.
Because you my elder. You are my elder. If you ask me to do something, I'm going to get up and do it. Right? Let's be clear. It's like you said do it, I'm like, I'm going to tell you no, I don't think so.
So thank you all. I appreciate your contributions, and I'm richer because of you.
I see.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Y'all.